And hello, this is the third video from the Communism PowerPoint. So now just talking about the actual leaders who brought communism to Russia. One of them was Vladimir Lenin, so the actual first communist guy being in charge. And he transformed the Russian society, and then his version of communism was obviously going to be called Leninism, okay, based on his name. So Lenin was very similar to Marx. He was obviously taking ideas from Marx. So, he believed in revolution. Well, if it needs to be violent, then it needs to be violent, right? But his version of communism was a little bit different than Marx's version, because in Marx's ideal version of communism, not even the government will be necessary. Whereas Lenin realized, well, at least in the beginning, we definitely do need a communist government, okay? So once he managed to start the revolution, well, he needed to pull out of the war first and then just consolidate power in Russia because, just like every country that's going through the revolution, it was in disarray, lots of poverty, hunger, protests, civil wars, and all that. So he just needed to establish an actual government to start, governing and controlling. And it's going to take a few years with, again, just with him dealing with a civil war and the actual World War One, and with a bunch of other insurrections up until he turned the country into like a new version that's gonna be called the Soviet Union. Um, so in the beginning, people actually liked what Lenin was doing, especially if they were poor. Okay, so the land redistribution was great for those who did not have a lot; they loved it. For those workers who were just working in the factories for really poor wages, that was also a great idea as well. That the workers were now being in charge. Um, Women loved it because all of a sudden now they're the whole idea of communism is everybody's equal, well, including women then as well. So that was great for them too. Um, it was good for arts and music in the beginning as well, and this kind of like functioned up until Lenin's death when Stalin's gonna take over. But were there a lot of problems with Leninism? Yes, absolutely, a lot of them. Okay, and one of them was called the war communism, um, and then eventually that's gonna turn into civil war as well. So this one we're not gonna go into that many details, but it was just the idea that if you want to establish communism, well, then it needs to be done by a lot of people going through a lot of sacrifices. Okay, there's going to be a lot of measures. People are going to have to like give away food and things like that, right? And this war communism was kind of like a very extreme thing, and it did not work that well because people naturally started rebelling and striking when they're like, oh, well, you have to give all your food, well, you have to give away your ownership and so on. So there was a big economic crisis. So that's what you need to know about the war communism. um, and this is the one thing where, for example, Lenin is really going to differ from Stalin, his new economic policy. So, this new economic policy was actually almost as if he was switching away a little from the extreme left and moving more so towards the moderate left. Why? Because Lenin realized that a lot of people were not working as hard as they used to when they have a better motivation. So if a farmer, for instance, lost his farm to nationalization, and now that's a state-owned farm, that farmer did not have an incentive anymore to work super hard and do all the hard work on the farm, the weeding and everything that he or she used to do. It's like, well, it's not even my farm anymore. Why would I have to work very hard? And let's somebody who owns a bakery privately. before the revolution, and now it's a publicly owned baker. It's like, well, why do I have to work super hard now? Because no matter whether I make good bread or bad bread, it's still going to be the same for me. So a lot of people either just did not do a good job anymore, or they were doing it kind of like on purpose to defy the new communist government. And some even turned to Luddite methods. They were burning down their crops and destroying things like on purpose, just for this new radical communism to fail, so they can go back to the old system. So they're obviously very reactionary. And then the new economic policy just took that into consideration, that element of human nature that, people tend to work better when there's some incentives. Okay. So it actually allowed a little bit of private ownership, a little bit of communism, a little bit of individualism. So it kind of moved away from that extreme side of the left wing and allowed a little bit of, um, you know, moderately leftist side of things. So again, almost a bit of liberalism in a way. Okay, and as you can imagine, like the hardcore communists, they're like, "Wow, this NEP new economic policy that's we're abandoning communism and moving back towards capitalism, individualism, private ownership, and all that." So they were not very pleased, and Stalin was one of them. He's gonna become a future leader of the Soviet Union. um, but yeah, this actually worked because again, it showed that again, that side of human nature, when there's some kind of incentive, well, people tend to work harder and better, and it actually brought um, very positive changes in Russia, and the economy got stabilized, and all that, right? And then, well, once Lenin was dead, well, then Stalin reestablished that, again, classical, hardcore, extreme version and understanding of communism. Okay, so for him, it was all about power, it was all about control, it was all about fear. Um, so his idea was that the more I oppress, the more fear I put into people, the more they're gonna listen to me, and no more nonsense like a little bit of individualism, freedom, and private property brought by new economic policy. We're gonna abandon all that, and people are just gonna do as I say, or I'm just gonna imprison them or kill them. And that's what he did with millions and millions of people. Just setting up an example, showing that whoever doesn't listen to me is going to be dead. Okay, so these are just some of the elements of Stalinism, so establishing prison camps, secret police, propaganda, having these 5-year plans, collectivizing all farms. So, just turning back to like real extreme left, coupled with very, very violent means, and, just again saying, this is how you do things. If you don't, you're either going to be imprisoned or dead, or in one of these camps that were almost like, this was almost like slavery. Okay, so you get to a camp where you have to work super hard up until the rest of your life without any compensation. So it's almost like enslaving people. Okay, um, yeah, just some posters here. And then, what were some successes of communism? Was there something positive that came out of it? Well, Great Depression, for example. Um, they did not go through that, or they managed to avoid it, and you're going to see that's also going to be later a big characteristic for fascism as well. Okay, so when those big economic recessions and depressions come, governments who tackle it the best are actually the ones that exercise the most control. Okay, so this is going to be something that's going to be interesting to see, once the coronavirus ends. Many countries will have to turn towards those methods that we've already done when we talked about New Deal in the United States in the 30s, where the state actually took charge and created jobs and all that. And then obviously in communism, where the state owns everything, it's going to be very easy for them to avoid the Great Depression, because people are not going to have a choice. The whole problem with depressions are that people have a choice what to do with their money, and people end up not spending their money, and then that's awful for the economy, right? But in communism or in fascism, the state just takes over everything, and then there's no option for people to destroy the economy by not shopping, which is what happened in most liberal democratic countries. So that's one advantage that communism or even fascism have. And again, during the Great Depression, those who were using Keynesianism and New Deal were stealing from those ideas that the state should be really involved, at least during the recession, right? So yeah, that's going to be something that's probably going to happen after coronavirus too. Even the very capitalist, democratic, liberal states will have to turn to like those more um, authoritarian methods, and establish some kind of state ownership, state controlled jobs, and all that if they want to pull the country out of the recession. So that was one advantage. Then equality was another one as well, especially on the social axis. And then another idea was that, when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to literacy, it's going to be public, it's going to be available. So, this is something, for example, that a country like Canada is also using that, yeah, our healthcare is also going to be public as well and universal and available to everybody. So, there are some ideas from the left side that countries have either permanently adopted, like Canada and healthcare, or at least temporarily adopted, like US and Great Depression and so on. Or again, when it comes to idea of social equality. Okay, but that just oftentimes this is all on paper as well, right? Like especially when it comes to equality, as we all know, it was not a real equality. So again, the communists were being more equal than others, just like uh, in the Animal Farm. And then there were some evils of communism as well. And one example is Holodomor. Then we're going to compare that to Holocaust when we did fascists, and that was already in Social 20 as well. So you probably have some knowledge. So just briefly, what happened during Holodomor, um, which was mostly in Ukraine. Ukrainian farmers and just Ukrainians in general were really resisting Stalin's ideas. So he just basically decided to punish them. What he decided was to just cut their food supply because they had a couple of bad crops for a couple of years and starve out about, some people say, up to like 10 million people were, essentially killed. Not, nobody was shooting at them, but were killed by not being given food, which is probably even worse, like a slow and painful death rate. Um, and that, a lot of people say that was also a part of Stalin's plan. If I can show the rest of my country that I can starve out 10 million people because they're not listening to me, because they're not doing what I am and telling them to do when it comes to my plans regarding agriculture, industrialization, and all that, then everybody else will really do as I say in the future. And it actually really did work that way. After this, nobody was defying Stalin anymore anywhere, right? Just showing that it's incredibly inhumane. It's a genocide essentially, but you know, after that, nobody dares say anything against Stalin and his methods and policies anymore. So, just this one talking about political, economic, and social ideas.